This is probably the biggest point here, is that you want to separate the sport from the methodology. Yo, so this weekend, I did the entire semifinals thing with Savon and the podcast team. After the first day of that, I made a decision that I want to try to be the person who is just going to draw a hard line in the sand. Here is my opinion. This is the way that I think it should be. You can agree with me or you don't have to agree with me. But if I say something, usually I have a bunch of stuff to back it up, and that's kind of where the entire premise of my channel has come from. The fact that I don't just try to say things that are my opinion, but I think that there's a bunch of stuff underneath it that props up that opinion. I find that a lot of people agree with me. Some people don't agree with me, but that's okay because this entire channel is opinion-based. But I want to be driving those opinions so hard that you start to believe them as well. I had a post sent to me yesterday by a guy named Justin Miller, owner of SBC CrossFit down in Louisiana, one of my main Robins, and the post was from a guy that a lot of us know. He's a former CrossFit Games athlete. His name is Adrian Conway. Adrian Conway put out a post about the GHD Sit-Up. This is something that I see pretty often. It's like, oh, the GHD Sit-Up. Are you allowed to have your hips behind the pad? Are you allowed to have your hips on top of the pad? And then the question is, does it even matter?
It doesn't matter what you think!
Here's where I come from. I come from the perspective that all sports are made up. At some point in time, baseball was made up, football was made up, basketball was made up. And most recently, to us in particular, CrossFit was made up. And this movement that we're talking about, the GHD Sit-Up, is entirely made up. You know what this is called? It's called the Glute Ham Developer. Do you know where those things are? They're not on the front of your body. They're on the backside. They're on the butt. They're on the hamstrings, the butt, the glutes, the hamstrings, the backside of your body, right? You're supposed to do this entire movement facing the floor. You can do back extensions on the machine. This is a machine that you learn in the CrossFit Level 1. Also in the CrossFit Level 1, they teach you how to do a GHD Sit-Up, a Glute Ham Developer Sit-Up. Does that mean that they shouldn't be teaching it? No, I think it's a great movement. I think that everyone should have the ability or at least understand why you are doing a GHD Sit-Up. Adrian Conway makes 2 posts, and in his second post, he brings up those things. He tells you exactly why you're doing a GHD Sit-Up, how to do a GHD Sit-Up. In that second post, he gives you 5 things that you should be trying to do. Proper setup, brace the abs, soften the knees as you descend, touch the floor with the hands, abs still firm, drive the knees down by the hip flexors and quads, abs still firm. This redirects you from causing unnecessarily extension or flexion. Touch the pads, repeat, practice a lot correctly. The main point that Adrian Conway is trying to drive across is that when you are taught how to do a GHD sit-up, you are supposed to have your hips on this side of the pad. Meaning if this is the pad, you don't want your hips on top of the pad, you want your hips behind the pad so that you're swinging a little bit more freely off of it. The issue becomes when your hips are on top of the pad, all of a sudden you're going to need to break at the spine a little bit. That isn't something that is taught by level 1. It's core to extremity. This is supposed to be a solid piece, that being your core. Your core is supposed to be solid when you're moving around. It's not supposed to be breaking, flexing, extending while you're throwing your body around. That's not safe for your upper body. That's something that's taught to you in the CrossFit level 1. I call them super planks. So when you hold a plank, everyone understands that you're supposed to maintain a rigid torso, right? Whenever I teach somebody how to do a GHD sit-up, I'll say, okay, I will have their hips off of the pad because that's how you're supposed to do them. To which extent Adrian Conway is right, and I agree with him. You're supposed to have your hips off the pad if you're doing them the right way. I then say that you are doing a super plank because you are adding a little bit of velocity, you're bringing yourself back, and as you do so, you're going to keep your stomach as tight as possible. That's where the plank part comes in. You shouldn't be extending. Don't reach for the floor. I tell people, if you start reaching for the floor, I'm going to stop you from doing the GHD sit-up. Now, this goes for 99% of people. 99% of people are supposed to do the super plank. My version, the super plank. Call it the super plank. Everyone steal it. It's like when you're going to the floor, super plank. Everything in here stays tight. And then at which point you bring yourself up by extending the legs and engaging the quads. Exactly what Adrian said. But at the level of the CrossFit Games, and when you're doing things from point A to point B, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter
how you're supposed to do it. There needs to be a standard. The standard is you touch the pad up top and then you touch the floor. And if CrossFit implements a riser on the floor, then you got to touch the riser. Something brought up in the comments section of the post that Adrian put up was that at regionals in 2016, it was one of the years where they implemented the GHD sit-up and that they weren't allowed at the regional. So what I did is I went to the regional videos, and I looked at everybody's GHD placement. I remember Dre Strom that year was at my regional doing this workout and blew it out of the water. This isn't the regional that Adrian Conway was in. This isn't the regional where you can have a little bit of reference to say, oh, this isn't how we were allowed to do it. So I pulled clips from both regionals. I pulled them from mine and I pulled them from Adrian's. Adrian, mind you, is the one who won his workout in his region doing them this way. We'll get back to that later. Dre Strom, Central Regional. This is not Adrian's regional. We'll do that one next, but his hips are on top of the pad. Look directly next to him. I believe that's Brian Wong. His hips are behind the pad. That's the way that Adrian says that he wants you to do them. So we right here see that Dre Strom's foot pad, see the angle of his foot pad, see how it's way back? It's thrown all the way back. That's the way that I do them typically. I do them because they're allowed that way. You can see that Brian Wong's foot angle, those little bars right there, they're straight up and down. That shows you that one has their hips on top and one has them behind. This is something that I'll talk about later in this video. I'm going to zoom in right away because it's the best angle that you can see the bars right there where I told you look at the bars, you can tell where the foot pad is, and then you can tell whether or not they're probably getting their hips behind of or on top of that seat right there so that they're doing them the way that Adrian keeps on mentioning. This is Adrian's regional. He ends up winning this workout. He's in the same heat. I'm going to show a clip of him after this one, but you can see that Travis Williams here has his hips on top of the pad, maybe not quite as egregiously as Dre Strom has them in his region, but the indicator is, again, that little pad that you kind of stick your feet into at the end, the foot placeholder. There's a lot of athletes here who are doing them the right way, and this is just a point in time where a lot of people don't know what's going on. Can you do them this way? Can you do them that way? Which way is easier? And
you have to touch the floor with both hands, touch the foot pad with both hands.
I made mention in the Dre Strom, or maybe I make mention at the end of the video, that Strom with Froning over there, they're doing what's allowed because it's easier. You become more efficient when you're doing them that way in competition. And here you can see the direct comparison between Adrian and Travis Williams. It doesn't look as bad as, of course, with Dre Strom with his hips totally on top of the pad, thrown all the way back, but there is a difference here, and that's the issue. There can't be that big of a difference here. If there's that big of a difference here, the gray area becomes in, and it's almost like you're driving yourself away from the muscle ups. What is a rep? So what you just saw is that Dre Strom had his hips on top of the pad. What you saw is that Travis Williams had his hips on top of the pad. And what you saw was that Adrian Conway had his hips behind the pad, which is the way that you're supposed to do them per his terms. He won the workout. Travis Williams didn't win the workout. Dre Strom won the workout. This kind of harkens to a, hey, everybody in CrossFit for the most part does a high bar back squat. It's how everyone's taught to do them. If you were to go to the level 1, that's how they teach you how to do them. Then you could look at somebody who's doing it low bar fashion. If someone's doing a low bar fashion, it might fit their anthropometrics a little bit better. Some people are made up in different ways. Some people being made up in different ways makes some movements easier for some than it does for others. So if I throw the bar lower on my back, I can get into a more comfortable squat position, rep after rep after rep. Maybe for someone like Adrian Conway, it's easier for him to have his hips off the pad. Is it a harder movement? Are you carrying a little bit more? Is there a physics component of it? Yes, there's a physics component of it. So if his upper body, more of it's hanging off the top of the pad, the pivot point is now greater and there's more load being moved across the entire spectrum. But does that mean that it's as hard for him as it is for everybody else? Not necessarily. Everybody's made up a little bit different. Some people have different strengths and weaknesses. I would be stupid to say that for the most part, it is harder to do it the way that he is doing it. And it is easier to have your hips on top of the pad. That's why everybody has done it. There is a shift. There's totally been a shift. There was a point in time where I believe Rich Froning may have been the only one, and it's no coincidence that Dre Strom has his hips on top of the pad, where he was also a huge mayhem athlete, trained with Rich, was on Rich's team. Rich was one of the first people that I ever noticed who had his hips on top of the pad. And then what I did is I went to the gym the next day and I tried it out. What I found was that I couldn't reach the floor. I had to kind of change up my movement pattern a little bit to then reach the floor. When I'm doing the GHD sit-up, I still try to do the super plank with my hips on top of the pad. They're easier because the pivot point's a little bit different. And what I do is I get out to the floor and I throw the hip pad all the way back. Why? Because I'm trying to go from point A to point B and I'm trying to do the most work per CrossFit's term in as little time as possible. It's completely allowed by CrossFit and I don't think that it's worth changing. This is just another avenue to cause even more arguments. There is no argument in hip crease below the knee. If you don't do it, then you should get a no rep. If you don't lock out your elbows on top of the rings, it should be a no rep. The fact that we're adding that gray area being, oh, maybe if they push away, then they're locked out behind the rings, that's the whole fucking issue right now. And if we're on the GHD and it's like, oh, where are their hips in relation to the pad? It becomes a whole nother issue. It's just like pushing away off the top of the rings. All you gotta to do is, do their hands touch the floor? Do their hands touch the pad? Just like on top of the rings, you'd say, do you see a support position? Even for a fraction of a second, was there a support position? If there was no support position, they didn't do a muscle up. Now the fact that we allow like that gray area is completely idiotic. I've spoken about this before. The best thing about the burpee in CrossFit is that you touch your chest to the floor, and then you come on up and you jump and you touch your hands overhead. You do so in a straight line. If there's anything other than that, it wasn't a burpee. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter
What you do between it. And it very much is the argument a lot of people have with CrossFit and doing their pull-ups. Pull-ups are chin above the bar to a hanging position, right? That fucker still doesn't extend. Come on, baby! But you know what I mean. Your chin over the bar, and then you hang. You can do it in a butterfly fashion. You can do it in kipping fashion. If we make the argument that you have to have your hips in a certain spot on this pad, then all of a sudden you have to say, well, you have to do pull-ups this way. And everyone who's ever tried to argue with anybody on the internet knows that it's a losing battle to say anything other than, well, I gotta get my chin above the bar, I gotta straighten my arms. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter
What happens between the two of those things as long as I'm doing those two things. It's not something that you can implement. If you're going to do one, you can't do the other. If all of a sudden you say you have to have your hips on top of the pad, then we can go to the Rogue Turkish Get-Up Challenge, which I made a video on, and you should say, oh, you have to go back down to the floor, because it's how everybody teaches the Turkish Get-Up. The rules of the competition are you touch the floor, you touch the pad. Stop causing a big stink about things that don't need to have a big stink caused about them. Chin above the bar, elbows locked out. Turkish Get-Up, whatever your freaking rules are. If you want to stand up and that's the end of the rep, that's the end of the rep. CrossFit Games says that the GHD Sit-Up is you touch the pad, you touch the floor. That isn't the methodology. This is probably the biggest point here, is that you want to separate the sport from the methodology. Everybody hates that. I keep on saying, oh, how great Greg Glassman is. But you know, Greg Glassman was trying to separate the sport from the methodology. He never even liked the sport. There's a reason they changed that studio to a freaking 1970s home-looking thing where their grandma's doing stand-ups with water jugs. It's because it was the important part to him. And from what I hear in this post is that a lot of people don't understand that they are different things. Sport is get the work done, get it done within the rules. And in CrossFit, the idea is teach everybody to move the best they can for the rest of their lives. Adrian's comment does resonate with that. You need to move the best you can for the rest of your life, and doing these with your hips on top of the pad might not lead that. But stop getting it twisted, get your head on straight. Sport is different than the methodology. There's a reason everyone's doing it, so it's easier and because it's allowed. Cut it out. Understand what it is. Andrew Hiller out.